Okay, everyone, welcome to today's show, and we are going to explore money myths today, and that belief around money, and particularly property investment. We're going to kind of centralise around that because that's what we do, and how those money myths can sometimes cost you more than your investment itself. The entire world of investment, I think, is full of statements and things that sound like facts. I mean, for one, Jim. Here's one. Do you really need a lot of money to start investing? What would your answer to that be?
No, you don't need a lot of money at all. It's a misconception. To start, because you could use other people's money. That's a perfect method to do that, using other people's money. However, it's not as easy as that. You've then got to convince someone to invest in the project that you're working on. And that is all about presenting it in the right way. In other words, you're doing a mini business plan to them. You can't just rock up to someone that you know, like an auntie or an uncle or a granddad or a mum or a dad or something like that, and say to them, you've got loads of money. Give me some money and I'm going to invest in this project. Okay, then how much do you need? Oh, 100,000. It's like, oh, no bother, I'll give you. That's got no chance. You have to make a justification and a point for it. It's a long-winded way to answer your question about. Do you need money to make money? No, you don't. You've got skill. You've got expertise that you can actually sell. That's the key here. You've got skill and expertise that you can sell. And a classic example of that, right down at bare basics, you've got time for effort. That's it. You sell your time for effort. That's called a job. That's the same thing. So you're making money.
Yeah, and we've covered it quite a lot, that you have mastered something and developed your knowledge and got a real skill, and you could demonstrate to people how this could work, then they're going to invest in you. And that is how you would then demonstrate to somebody that they should give you money to further invest. Now, there's other myths and things like, people say property always goes up. Now, Jim, you could argue that is the truth, but unless you do it right, it's not going to.
Let me just qualify that statement.
Yeah.
Property always goes up. Long term, unless you're in Japan, and it's been like that for a lot of years. Yeah, but that's the Japanese economy. They and hopefully our economies have actually learnt by the Japanese mistake.
Yeah, another one is borrowing is bad. People try and stay away from borrowing, and if you're investing, then that's another method of using other people's money, i.e., the bank. But a lot of people still are hesitant to do that. Why do you think that is?
Short-term loan sharks.
Yeah,
going back to that, it's that, and I know it doesn't. When you think of it logically in the bigger picture, you think, no, it can't be that. Yeah, it is, because it's just that statement. It triggers somebody off for the flight or fight response, isn't it? Borrowing is bad. It's like, well, you've got good debt and bad debt, depending on how you borrow it. If you borrow it to invest in assets which actually produce money, which is a higher return that you're borrowing it, then it probably is good debt. So the borrowing is technically an asset to you. It's a necessary. Whereas if you're borrowing to buy a car, which actually is going to depreciate in value, or you're going to borrow even more to buy a house that you don't actually need, and it's beyond your means, then I would say that's probably bad debt as well. If you borrow to buy a house which works for your means, within your means, and it's the right size and type of house for you in the right location, then it probably makes sense if it leads to better quality of life, and it possibly leads to a better quality job and more prospects. And so that's kind of investing for the future when you do that, and for children, for bringing them up and having a nice lifestyle, as opposed to well, for me, I've never known what it's like to live in a city centre location and grow up there. It's like I mean, when I go to Edinburgh for the festival and stuff like that, and when you go to St Andrews and you've got peak season, you go along the East Neuk peak season as well. It's like, geez, I'm not really sure I could manage.
It's good and it's a great atmosphere, but you think long term,
long term, could you put up with that? Yeah, could you put up with that? I would probably rather, like most people in St Andrews do, live on the outskirts.
and travel in if they need any town. Yeah.
And they let the students live on the in the centre of St Andrews. Hence the reason why 50% of the population disappears around about Christmas and holiday season, and the town is actually really quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the borrowing is bad, and also things like, we're going to cover that a wee bit more in depth as we go through today's show. Landlords making easy money, and the green rules, which we're talking about net zero. We're going to cover that as well. How they destroy your returns. I mean, not in every case, but many of these, of course, are not facts. They're just these money myths. And what I mean by that is assumptions that can influence decisions just as much as interest rates, tax, and property prices can. So we're going to kick off, and we're going to look a wee bit more at the money side. And the first kind of myth that we've saying about, like, you need money to make money, and probably one of the oldest money sayings, and one of the one that stops many people before they've even begun, because they think, oh, I've no money, I can't do it. So what's let's look at the truth behind that then.
Is that an excuse though?
It possibly can be.
I think for a lot of people, 95%, that could be a good guess. An accurate guess, more than likely. For 95% of people, I think that's the excuse that they use in order to not actually do anything.
Mm-hmm.
For the 5% that actually end up becoming successful, that's the ones that they use for the reason to actually get motivated and do something about it. And they don't believe that in their mind. We don't know who that 5% is, and 95% is at this point in time. And if you're sitting in the 95% group, you can choose to be in the 5% group by your actions and your attitude and your discipline and your consistency. And over a period of time, you will be in that 5% group.
Mm-hmm. Now, there'll definitely be people listening, tuning in or whatever, and feel free to jump in the comments. But just to clarify, we're not saying, property, when you invest in property, it does require capital, deposits, legal fees, mortgage costs, a refurbishment at some level, and these all need to come from somewhere. But starting capital and personal wealth are not necessarily always the same thing.
Look what a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but a lot of the huge investors who have a lot of units, properties. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll just call them units for the sake of it. Mm-hmm. So they've got a lot of units, and what they're doing is they buy undervalue, they refurbish, they appreciate the rents, and then they sell that to investors at the higher value, because investors still getting a really good return, but they're buying at the higher value. So they make the uplift in it, and they often keep that uplift to keep a share of that equity instead, and that's their uplift. So they maybe bought it, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 million. They then uplift it to about 5 million, and then they keep and sell it on, and they keep £2 million worth of the equity, because they bought it at 2 or 3 million, and that's then paid off because it's used with debt to buy it, to appreciate it. And then they have 2 million that they actually got out of just using someone else's money, appreciating the value, and actually selling it on to other people to invest in with them at a higher rate. Look at Richard Branson. Mm-hmm. Mosquito Island. He bought it for 10 million. He then sold off 10 plots at $1 million each. This is right from the horse's mouth, by the way. No, that I'm calling you a horse, Richard. I'm just saying it's an expression from him. He knows
not
that.
Me, Richard.
Yeah, he knows that anyway. Yeah, Richard Branson. Yeah. Okay. And so he sold each plot off at $1 million to, the owners of Home Bargains and other people as well around the world. They then built their own plot, but then that recouped all his money. And then he kept about a third of the island, which he created the Branson estate on Mosquito Island, which looks over to Necker Island, where he lives.
Which then ensures his privacy on his own island.
Yeah, and literally that all, when he told me basically that everything that he sold off to everybody else for paid for all that, the third in the Branson estate, and that paid for all that. So he got that for nothing.
But that's just, to me, that's a smart investment plan.
But that's what the most successful people do. But you don't need to be that big high profile. You could just be a small investor and do it on a smaller scale. One property.
Yeah.
You buy a property at way under value. You then invite an investor to come in at the appreciated value, and then you take an equity stake, and the investor takes more or less probably the debt that you just bought it for, and the rest is yours for free. because it's your skill and expertise that's done that, and then you refurbish it and then you resell it at a wee bit of higher value as a result of that, and therefore the investor makes a return and you make a return as well as you get all the return and the uplift you got in the beginning. You invited the investor in, but the investor's still happy because they're at a figure they would never have got anyway. I mean, 50% of something's better than 100% of nothing.
That's a great example, and I think it would be fair to say, or do you think it would be fair to say, that in that scenario, and the bigger starting asset you could have is the knowledge and the preparation and the ability to recognise that kind of opportunity and how to actually execute that.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. It's skill and expertise that you learn over a period of time, but you're not going to learn anything unless you do it. It's the old Nike logo, just do it. Done is better than perfect at this point in time. However, if you're investing in someone like this, make sure you've got some sort of, fixed security against the asset. So you're okay. So if anything happens, you can get your money back from the asset. Don't have an unsecured debt. That's not the way to do it, because then if anything happens, you've lost everything.
Yeah, but without the right skill, expertise, and knowledge, someone that's got maybe a pot of, say, 100 grand with no strategy could make really expensive mistakes, and then somebody considerably less capital but a really strong understanding of finance, if you do buy-to-let investment, location, yield, the demand, they do the risk analysis, they make much better decisions and could make. Yeah, well, there you go.
I started out with nothing. There you go. I'm the perfect example of somebody that started out with nothing.
There was a couple of questions I was going to put to you, and you kind of answered that one there straight off, because it's like, well, how much? And people will ask, like, how much do you really realistically need to begin?
Nothing.
And can it be actually nothing as long as you've got
yes,
on the side? Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough to have assets, and I borrowed against the assets. I borrowed 100% against the assets. But you can start off with nothing now, and effectively, I don't know if they do it anymore, but you can go for a car loan and end up just spending it on something else, like a house or investment. So you can get, you don't need to say it's a car loan. You could just say, look, I'm wanting a loan, and then take over a certain period of time. And if the numbers work and the return works, then why not do that? It's just a way to get started. And you in the early days, people that used to buy houses on credit cards because they use the credit card as the deposit.
But that's what
they use the bank's money for the financing.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to come on. I did have some questions about money, but we kind of covered that, and I wanted to move on and come back to borrowing, because we touched on it at the beginning.
Okay.
Borrowing money and how people's reaction to borrowing money, because debt has got quite a bad reputation with a lot of people, because most people experience debt initially through personal borrowing, and like you say, it's credit cards, card finance, loans, and things that all have a negative association with borrowing.
Yeah,
but when it comes to investing borrowing,
let me just qualify that though. That's because the media shows everybody it's absolutely skint. It gets into trouble. Debt, yeah, and then all the media makes out that for all these people are skint and in trouble, debt was a bad thing for them. So everybody extrapolates that and projects it on other people and themselves and says, "Oh well, debt's going to be a bad thing for me as well." It's the herd mentality, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's that automatic association with your fear and thing with debt, and that's why people automatically stay away.
Yeah, and there's another one. There's another debt called a mortgage, and a mortgage is used against and for an investor to buy assets, which is predominantly investment properties. That's all it is.
Which is more than likely, and 9 times out of 10, considerably more than the cash that they could personally contribute. They would never be able to do that without borrowing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look at the borrowing just now. I've been approved for 700,000 with 100% borrowing.
Yeah,
because I've got enough assets to cover it, and the bank's got security over these assets anyway, and the loan to value is okay when that's taken into account and give me 100%. So therefore, job done. I can get up to 700,000 without actually putting any money down, because I've got the assets already they've got a security, so they're allowing me to do that. Whether I do it or no is another story. this is all about risk analysis and everything like that, and how comfortable I am with the loan to value and the prospects of where the economy is going and the housing market is going. So whether I do that's a different story, and that's a whole different show, isn't it?
Yeah, and do you know, I was just going to say that I'm not completely saying right now we're automatically saying borrowing is good in any situation. It's not.
Has to work.
It's whether borrowing is sustainable and works, and you've actually planned it out properly. Especially when it comes to, do you know, if you're considering interest rates and things, and whether your investment is going to have, like you say, stress testing and looking at different aspects, well, how they could change over the period of an investment. Rental property occupancy rate, is it going to be occupied? If it's not occupied for a certain amount of time, where does your numbers sit? How long until you're breaking even, or how long until you're losing? If interest rates change, where's your threshold? All these factors that you need to think about.
Yeah, if the economy, I mean, worst case scenario, we'll have a storm, which is effectively a wipeout like the credit crunch, and then everybody stops doing everything for 6 months. Could you sit for 6 months and actually be able to sustain that debt level, and actually service that debt? That's the key. That's why governments borrow trillions of pounds or trillions of dollars, but it's all about it's not how much they're overgeared. It's how much they can service that debt. That's how they work. And just like investors work as well. But also they have to make sure that they can weather a storm. A government's in a privileged position that they could just print money when they want. I mean, it does devalue their currency, but all else fails. They've always got that fail-safe, whereas an investor doesn't. An investor, a normal day-to-day investor, if anything happens and it goes south, then they're effectively losing everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about, if we talk about borrowing, what about maximum borrowing? Now, that isn't necessarily, optimum borrowing. And we've seen that 2008, people were borrowing well over
125% of their mortgage or their value of their property. Yeah. The Northern Rock had a product, it was 125% borrowing of your property value.
And every single person had done that at that time.
Yeah, they've probably lost their house at that time, to be honest. And the Northern Rock's no longer here for that very reason, because they just got greedy as well. Thought that was a great idea, because the property market always goes up, doesn't it, Northern Rock? Well, nobody's here to answer that, are they? I think the answer to that then is obviously it isn't. Obviously, it doesn't always go up. In the short and possibly in the medium term, but in the long term, it does go up.
Yeah. I think as well with property investing, especially if you've got a portfolio, and Jim, you'll stand testament to this, and I know that because it's tried and tested, but maintaining reserves and reinvesting back in a portfolio in your stock, rather than using every available pound that's there, and spend. And a lot of people spend rather than reinvest, or keep things in reserve for the unexpected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
definitely.
That could push a lot of people to the wall when they come up against changes in the investment, whether that's occupancy rate, interest rates, things change. They're not prepared for it. They don't have a fallback.
Yeah, I mean, I've always got a fallback. I've got a pension fund, and I've got the value in the property. I could do a fire sale and still come out with over $1 million. And then we've got our own property, which isn't secured against anything, and we're no debt ridden for anything. So we've always got all that as a fallback. And then I could always go, but I can go back to be a cleaner, window cleaner.
And that then says, because everybody says have an exit strategy, but it sounds like you've got about 3 or 4 options there.
Yeah, you could do anything if you live within your means as it is. Then you've got a lot of options available. I mean, that, I'll be honest, that helps you sleep at night. You're no longer controlled debt-wise by a bank. Money worries by a finance company, by your own business, by your job. You're no longer controlled by anything or anyone. You're no longer controlled by the government, because it doesn't matter if they change policy. won't really have a huge effect on you because you're living well within your means anyway. So, you know, if 50% of your income disappeared and you're only living on 50% of your income, then you're all right. Doesn't affect you at all in your lifestyle.
So you're set up to weather, 99% of storms that could arise. Yeah.
And the only thing that would wipe you out would be a nuclear war, and the whole world was destroyed. I suppose
we're all going to the same place then.
Yeah, we'd all be the same place anyway. So, but that's a very luxurious place to be in. But that's by design.
Mm-hmm.
That's deliberate. That is not accidentally happened. That's deliberate work towards that.
Yeah.
Where I'm in that unique position for that reason.
Yeah, I wanted to move on and actually talk about property itself a little bit, but just to round off about debt, and I think it's clear to say that debt is really a tool. It's the sustainability that determines whether the tool helps you or kind of hurts you, and it's how you use that tool. But property, a lot of people, another myth would be that property is completely passive income.
According to the UK government it is, and according to the Scottish government it is, all the politicians say that passive income is money for old rope. You're just taking money and you're not doing anything for it. And my argument to that is then, so you don't expect a return on your investment for your pension then? Because that's passive as well. Yeah, that's passive as well. So why should you get a return on your pension and I've not to get a return on my property investment? Well, it doesn't seem fair.
No, it doesn't.
So that's what the myth is. Plus the fact, here's the exact example here. If a letting agent looks after a property, puts a tenant in a property, finds a tenant, puts them in, collects deposit, forwards it on deposit onto the deposit scheme. They're available on the phone for the tenant when they move them in, after they move them in for repairs and improvements and to organise all that. They're available for the tenant in emergency situations. They're available for the tenant and the move out as well, and to help them to their next property. If that's classified as a job in a business, that's exactly the same thing as a self-managed landlord does. So why is that not classified as a job in a business?
Yes, and I see self-managed landlords who are expected to do the same as what we do as a job as letting agents. And I'm like, well,
I'm sure I saw an article this morning.
Job
It actually said, I thought I was going to be, I wasn't going to need to do anything from a self-managed landlord.
That's a bit delusional.
And it's like, you were extremely naive, weren't you?
Yeah.
You clearly didn't understand the remit or what the name of the game was.
And landlords are meant to...
that is it. That is it. It's that whole process. It's involved compliance and all the rest of it. Every property ages, so you've got to obviously repair and improve it over time. Every single time, roofs deteriorate, boilers fail, kitchens always need replacing at some point in time. I mean, we're starting to do things like that. Windows, degrade, even though they're double glazing. At some point in time, they become old and they're all rickety and you can't get parts for them anymore. Regulations change. The EICRs, the electricity standards, go up in terms of their standards. So therefore, when you come to the 5-year review, you've got to do something else to your electricity's installation and your fuse box in order to get the compliance and the certificate signed off. Yeah, I mean, all that takes cash flow every single month built up over a time. So that's why you should be building something up for larger expenditures that will come, because they will come in the future. And nothing's going to save you from that. It will happen. It's coming whether you like it or not. You might get away with it. A kitchen might last 20 years. You might have got a neutral kitchen. It might last 20 years, or it might last 20 months. Because you never know. You might get the right tenant, but the wrong person in their entourage is actually there as well, and they might end up destroying the house. You might not get a claim on your insurance because you're not adequately covered, and therefore you're left to reinstate that whole kitchen out your own pocket. Yeah,
and it's the unexpected, because people can say, "Oh, landlords are coining it in," and if we look for an example, like the reality of an upkeep of a rental property, and just if you're looking at say £300 as a surplus, and we'll call it a profit, but it's not necessarily a profit. Because as you say, Jim, you've got maintenance, repairs, possible refurbishments, got all the new compliance that we're dealing with on top of the original, insurance, possible void periods, you've got expenditure, and then all these, the future energy efficiency improvements coming up. And so by the time you weigh up that £300, it's going to eat into that quite a lot.
It's marginal costing for most people. They're not accountants. They're not cost accountants. Marginal costing is determined as where is the break-even point after all the direct costs are taken off, and also what is left after all the direct costs are taken off. So that £300 surplus is to go towards overheads, and it's the overheads that you've just explained.
Yeah, and the long-term thinking as well when it comes to any good property investor who has the right mindset will think of the long term, think and consider about lifetime costs rather than the monthly cash flow. The monthly cash flow is really important, but you need to think of the long term game.
I'm quite happy having things like maybe 25 to 30,000 in the bank, and the reason I say that is at any given month, because that means you could actually, if somebody's moving out, you could refurb a whole property from start to finish for that price. But you've got money coming in from all of the rents.
On top of that,
I do. On top of that, to replenish that the next month. Therefore, you could possibly do it all over again if you're a big enough landlord. But on a smaller scale, you would have to plan that over a longer period of time, and your exposure is a lot greater there because you've got less units to absorb these costs over, and to also generate that additional income over and above things that could affect that, like occupancy rate, interest rates going up, inflation, and stuff like that. This is what's key.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you're just explaining, is having an asset where the long-term income and growth justify the long-term costs.
Yeah, it's a place of doing business, isn't it? Yeah. But if someone that's naive enough gets into property and they actually look at their numbers and they go, I'm getting £1,000 rent a month, I'm going to a £500 mortgage, I'm going to make £500, and that's what they think. They're going to get £500 a month. And it's like, no, you're not. Because you'll have to pay insurance once a year for that property. You'll have to pay you'll have to put something aside for repairs and improvements over a period of time. This is what effectively depreciation is called in the accounts. Depreciation is classified as the wear and tear over the longer term. That term to be defined by the owner of when that asset will deplete against their profits. So they might pay £10,000 for a car, but the car lasts 5 years, then the depreciation is £2,000 a year. So effectively, you've got to think £2,000 a year for the next 5 years. So when the car finally gets junked, if it's rubbish after 5 years, and it gets moved on and it's not really worth anything, then you've got £10,000 to get another car. And a bit more, actually, because inflation would have taken that into account as well. So that's kind of what you've got to work on. And the same thing happens with a house with their kitchens and bathrooms and electrics and heating systems and roof and guttering and downpipes and gardens and carpets and decoration. If you've got to change something, if you have a flood and you have to sort it, then you have to then redecorate that. So it's all these different things, and you can't do all yourself, remember, because you've possibly got a full-time job as well at the same time. So you don't have the time to do this, and you have to pay someone else, which is going to be quite expensive. It's just the way it is now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I wanted to talk about supply and demand, and the myth about, if there's housing demand, supply will always catch up. Now that sounds logical. If people need homes, surely more homes will eventually be built. Now, you've listened to
telling John Swinney, and now Andy Burnham that it's like, supply is going to catch up because there'll be housing demand. There's been housing demand for years and years and years. Yeah. That's why homelessness is at a record high in Scotland, and yet we still can't catch up, and we will never catch up, because in Scotland, since the last 20 years, we're almost, I think it's 5.5 years behind the target or something.
Yeah, I mean, housing isn't produced like any other ordinary consumer product, but we're still severely behind where we should be, even with and what was promised as well by the government in terms of housing.
Mm-hmm.
And the housing shortage of the last few years, I mean, there's been a major supply chain disconnect between the demand for housing and the ability to deliver it. Ultimately,
I find it amusing, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that in an infuriating way to someone. So don't
no,
when I say that. I find it amusing to the fact that everybody goes on about things like land availability. It's like, but we've got flipping tons of land. You can effectively put the whole world on 1% of the world. All the population in the world, you could put on 1% of the land. Just squeeze them all together. No houses around. Just put everybody on that 1%. And you still have 99% in the world. So why have we got a land availability? What's all that about? And it's really down to things like planning. It's like planners say you've only got a certain amount of land because it affects everything else. So they restrict it as a result. And the infrastructure that has to go with it, and then the labour required to actually put that infrastructure into place, sent them all back after Brexit. And then the construction costs involved in that, and the materials have to get made, and we have to now import rather than export materials because we're not making them locally and manufacturing. And then the financing that comes with it based on the markets and what you've got to borrow. And the developer confidence can also affect that supply, which is actually what's happening right now. A lot of developers are realising all these additional costs on there and actually sitting on their land and saying, can't afford to build. Just can't afford to build.
Yeah.
I'd be better I could make enough. We could make enough return for our investors just doing what we're doing now. If we start to build more, it's going to cause a problem. It's going to dilute what we're doing. It's going to make things worse. We're not going to get the right service levels because we're now using less skilled people in order to do it because none of them are trained up properly. And this is the problem. This is like a cruise ship leaving the harbour, isn't it? Or the port.
Right.
You know how it starts at zero and it starts to try and speed up over time. And then over time, eventually it gets to top speed. Well, that's the number of years you think when you try to bump start a housing market and get new houses built. And that long-term effect. Now, what's happening now, because of everything that's happening, I just said there, the house builders sitting on their hands now. So that proverbial ship or metaphoric ship is now slowing down. So the housing market, the new build market, is actually slowing down. The build to rent, I'm not really sure about slowing down or not.
Yeah.
I'm not actively looking at build to rent because I'm not involved in it. It doesn't affect us at all, really. It's mainly in big cities, build to rent. You have got the housing associations obviously getting places built just now, but not on mass scale. You know, you're talking about maybe 20, 30, 40 units once in a blue moon in a specific area, and then they're off to somewhere else. So it's not really going to make a dent in the private rented sector, and it's not really going to make that much of a dent in the housing sector. For ownership, home ownership. I think it was something to do with the rental markets since the early 2000s has grown by 400%. The ownership market has actually started to drop between the 40 to 50-year-olds or 35 to 45-year-olds. The ownership has actually started to drop. I was reading an article. We had actually produced an article the other day, actually, and I was going over it, and I was thinking, yeah, that sounds about right, and it's quite concerning. And as government policy, it's obviously driven that. I mean, we are where we are because the decisions that have been made by government. It's funny that. I use the word it's funny, but it's not really funny. It's a phrase that we use a lot. It's interesting that because we are here by the design of what the other decisions have been made by government policy and lack of intervention over all the years. You still have them going back to blaming Thatcher for the sell-off of the council houses.
I know. I think they need to move on for that. I mean,
in the 1980s. I mean, the 80s was 1985 was, or 1986 was
46
years ago, was it?
46 years ago.
No, 1986.
1986.
No, 1986. So 1986.
I was born.
I'm trying to get my head around it. 1986 is 14 plus 26. 14 plus 26. Yeah, 40 years ago. They've
That
had
was the year I was
40
born.
years to do something about it. And the Conservative Party at that time was only in it for 10 years,
Yeah,
up
they
to
need
the
to
early
move on.
90s. So they've had 30 years to do something about it. And they've done hee-haw, for
The
want of a
irony,
better phrase.
yeah, and the irony as well, when you reference the government policy making builders hold back, they think it's too expensive to build, and then on the flip side, you would think maybe the private sector would step in and absorb some of that housing issue, but then it's got its own pressures because of the continued adage of compliance and restrictions and red tape,
Yeah.
and a lot of landlords again are leaving, and tenant demand still remains. Do you know? And it's
It's always going to be there because
so.
tenants, people that are tenants actually are quite comfortable being a tenant, in all honesty.
Yeah.
They probably like the idea of, listen, this isn't a broad brush approach in terms of what I'm saying here, so don't take this literally. But some tenants like the idea of just being a tenant. They don't want ownership. They don't want the risk involved. I had a financial director, it was with me in one of my companies, and they decided just to rent for the rest of their life. And I went, why would you do that? Because at that time I was like, ownership is the best way forward. And he says, well, we've got all our available money then to enjoy the experiences in our life, and we're not going to tie it all up in a house, which eventually we'll never have the enjoyment of.
Yeah.
Well, what about the kids? Well, we'll make sure the kids have the money now, because the money we would have put into the house we'll be able to give them. And the rent will be the most we'll ever pay for a house, because it's the landlord that would do the improvements and refurbishments, and the mortgage is the least you ever pay for a house. And you've still got everything else on top of it. So why would we want that? They didn't want the responsibility of that. Yeah, listen, he wasn't daft, because he did buy about 6 or 7 houses when I was telling him about investment, and he did make a killing when he sold them off.
Yeah.
So he made money, but he just didn't see the point of actually home ownership himself personally. He didn't think it was a good thing. So it's each to their own, and I think it's becoming more and more of a natural choice for people to become, I'm going to say, become more European, because more people in Europe rent their house than they do in the UK, significantly more. And it's a normal practice. Whereas when people rent their house there, you've got the politicians and the pressure groups, anti-private landlords, up in arms about the fact that why are people not got home ownership? Home ownership is the be-all and end-all. Well, home ownership was only ever devised by the banks to sell them mortgages. That's what that was all about, for the finance industry, to sell mortgages.
And there's so much more flexibility and less liability with renting, and people are becoming, aware of that and thinking, why am I going to tie a 30-year mortgage around my neck when I could, just and for a lot of people that's the right decision, and that's fine.
Absolutely. The other one as well is mobility of labour. I mean, here's a really good one about home ownership. For anybody that's been in their home for more than 2 or 3 years, ask yourself, if you were able to trade that home for somewhere else today, would you do it?
It's a good one.
Yeah, most people would say yes. So you're actually paying for a home that you don't actually, it's not your dream home.
You'd possibly rather be somewhere else, yeah.
Yeah, if you were renting, you could walk away anytime you want and just move somewhere else. That's the option it gives you, to move somewhere else. Don't like your neighbours? Just move.
And that gives you so much more control and freedom with your lifestyle.
It does definitely, I would say. Definitely.
So yeah, housing. So yeah, we covered the housing demand versus the actual available stock. We spoke about construction costs and development viability, the skilled labour shortages you talked about, planning and infrastructure, financing costs that developers have, and landlords leaving versus the amount of landlords entering. There's a difference between needing homes and being able to deliver homes, and we in Scotland and across the UK we could see that quite evidently, and especially over the last few years. But for investors, I think understanding the disconnect is important, because scarcity can influence rents, values, and create that opportunity, but it could also create pressure for intervention and things as well. So
absolutely,
again, It's about being in the know and having knowledge of the market.
What's myth number 5 then?
So number 5 is the rules that are implemented won't really affect your investment. Some people think it will not affect me. That doesn't include me.
I actually think that sometimes about me. It's like, no, they'll not affect my investment really.
But then do you think that because you've built and put in so much, so you possibly some of them don't affect you, Jim, because
I've spread my risk.
Yes.
I've spread my risk, so I don't need to worry too much about. I don't really need to worry too much because I've spread the risk quite a bit. So if it affects 20% of my portfolio, then the other 80% still fine. That's the reality. Because remember, if rent controls come in, I can tell you, if they actually actively apply rent controls, we're going to see another huge rent increase over time, where landlords will just turn round again, and we'll all in unison move our rents up to another level, and that's where you then prove that the market is actually up at that level now. You don't want rent controls because less landlords would move the rents up. Therefore, the tenant would be able to justify every single time that the rent is actually excessive comparison to the market rate. It's kind of like rent controls are creating a cartel, aren't they?
Yeah.
Rent controls are effectively creating a cartel for private landlords, because what they're doing is they're telling every private landlord to move the rent up whatever the rent control is set. If you set it 6%, it's like, well, just put your rents up 6%.
That's exactly
every landlord puts their rents up 6%. No one's got a choice then. So the government has created a cartel by accident with rent controls.
Yeah,
that's going to go down well. I'll have to make sure I can tag Jenny Gilruth. She's obviously blocked me just now, but I'm sure by the end of this we might be able to tag her again. Yeah. Listen, if anybody wants to understand what that's all about, it's like I told her in 2019, 2020 this would cause a problem. COVID, freezing the rents, and also rent controls coming in and changing the housing laws, and they didn't listen to a word I said, and everything I said would happen has actually happened.
Well, she's in a position now where she's got a lot more influence, so I would.
Oh, shit. I think she's in a position that she's just playing. Well, look at me. It's like, but hey, fill your boots, hen.
Yeah. But property itself, it's quite unusual because the investors who own property, they own the asset. But government policy and things significantly influence how that asset operates. But like we just explained here, Jim, say compliance changes, like say your portfolio when we had done all the electrical safety changes. I mean, that was a lot of cost, but your portfolio was designed to harbour that kind of cost. Some people, if they've got a portfolio, say maybe 5, 6 or something, if you're doing an EICR on every single property and it's costing, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000, you might not be able to do that. That's you.
They've not put money aside for things like that.
Yes. So it very much does have an influence on you when government policy changes. So don't think it doesn't. Taxation, rental regulations, like we spoke about, tenancy rules, energy standards. We're going to talk on a little bit about that just shortly. Planning and lending regulations can all alter the economics of your investment, even if you just have one property. So don't think it doesn't affect you.
You can't remove the political risk, can you? But you can definitely build the resilience against it.
Yeah, definitely. The danger is trying to predict possibly the government decisions. People maybe think they're smarter than what's going on around them, which is maybe a dangerous game to play. People do try and predict things, but the honestly is. I mean, I know you do a lot of predictions, Jim, and we did do a lot with COVID and things, and as you say, a lot of them did actually play out in that way. Do you think that's due to your experience of how things have happened in the past, or just?
Yeah, the past is. I mean, there's no future in the past. You've got to remember that. But the past is a good idea about where things would go, but also common sense in the fact that Buffett talked about it. You inject billions of pounds and dollars into the economy, then obviously inflationary pressure is going to result. If you change legislation to have open-ended leases, you're obviously going to have no control over a tenant which is not paying your rent or is antisocial, because you've no longer got any leverage to actually get them to toe the line, if that makes sense. Because that's what we used to do before with an antisocial tenant.
Yeah.
Say, look, sort yourself out, behave, or we'll evict you. And now it's like, well, you can't do a damn thing. And even the council will tell us.
Antisocial is one of the most difficult things to regain possession of. Which is,
and I feel really sorry because I've had only a few times in the past, I've had people come and say, oh, it's this and it's that. And it's like, can you know doing this? And I'm like, I can't. Government's tied their hands now. You know, tied their hands and tied their legs as well. And it's like, there's nothing we can do about antisocial behaviour anymore, except tell you we could speak to the tenant could still continue to do it, and you would have to get some sort of
injunction,
a diary from the local authority in order to assess, and then the local authority would then have to go to the courts or something like that and get an antisocial behaviour order. An antisocial behaviour order issued. And even at that, your landlord can't do anything once that's issued.
Yeah.
Because we had that with someone who inherited. It had an antisocial behaviour order, and the court wouldn't grant the eviction. Mental.
Yeah, we ended up having to go down a different route because we exhausted every avenue with the antisocial.
And in that time, the old man downstairs ended up being on palliative care.
Yeah,
on his way out because this boy had terrorised him.
It was a
to death.
Terrible situation. Not one of our tenants that we chose or anything like that.
Just one we inherited from buying the whole the stock of a landlord. It's appalling that the government couldn't protect that person downstairs with the legislation. They actually supported the person that was doing it.
It's ludicrous. It's a crazy situation, but that's how it played out. But from an investment point of view, when we talk about the government policies having an influence on your property, and people might be a bit confused about that, and how do I mitigate that? And we've said that several times, and there's a better approach. And when you've got an investment, look at your investment and think, can it survive several different versions of what the future might hold? And that's your risk analysis that you've talk about quite often, Jim.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If taxes rise, will my property survive? Do you know, if regulation changes, do I have a fund there to help me make these improvements and things? Changes in rental rules, higher compliance costs, restrictions affecting rent increases, mortgage rates and conditions, and then the energy efficiency rating changes and things. Can you weather that kind of storm? Do you have a fund there to make changes if you need to, or if the landscape of maybe interest rates and things changes?
Let's talk about myth 6.
Which is net zero.
Net zero.
I know you're not a fan.
Net zero is just another cost. Personally, net zero is just another cost.
Yeah.
But when we talk about renewables and net zero requirements, they're often it feels like we're getting pressurized into this, and we're almost it's creating a fear within the environment.
Mm-hmm.
But net zero can be smaller things like, you know, new heating systems, insulation, which is literally impossible in flats because you have to get the permission from everybody else, double glazing, energy efficient improvements. It could cost money, but not a huge amount. So my recommendation to most landlords, when you're going to refurb a property, try and refurb it at the same time to get the energy rating up as well. And I mean LED, I mean higher insulation in the loft, you know, just all these different things. If the boiler's an old inefficient boiler, then a back boiler, then change it for another one and try and get that up. Bank gives you better lending criteria as well when you've got, I think it's C. If you've got an APC of C and above, you're getting a slight amount of interest rates, but it's better. It's better than nothing. When it comes down to
over time, it would add up. Yeah.
If you've got older stock like me, I like older stock. I don't like new build. I'm not a fan. Not a fan at all. I've got some new build, very little, but most are older stock. I like the old stock because the older stock has scope for improvement and is very, very flexible for improvement in terms of how you do it. You can change access in the property. You can take away walls, put stud partitions up. You can change designs and layouts and stuff like that. That's what I like about it. and it does add value. Then newer stock, you do that, and I don't think it adds as much value as an older stock could do.
No, and the older stock, it's a lot more solidly built. You've just, I think they're just more dependable. Is maybe a good word to use. I think than
the government's ethos is, if you get net zero as a landlord and you do all these inefficient improvements, then the tenant, it will attract a better quality tenant to your property because they'll be able to save money on the utilities and everything else, and the heating and environmental impact. And yes, that could be the case, but unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It's not a black or white issue. People do not choose where they live based on the EPC rating. They choose where they live based on their job, based on how they want their lifestyle to be. They don't choose the base, that's what they choose it on. They don't choose it on the EPC rating. I've never had anybody come up and ask me what the EPC rating is for a property.
I would say it's become a little bit more in people's thought process, but it's not a deciding factor. Like you say, if they've got the right property in the right area, whether it's close to work, family, it's going to override if it's a D instead of a C rating or whatever. It's not a deciding factor, but people do look at it a lot more because it's in the news and the headlines. It's pushed out there. It's put in people's mind.
Yeah, it's the thing that you have to then work out, the EPC versus an energy efficient expectations about what is the maximum you can get out of that property. It's beneficial cost wise. In other words, when you get an EPC done, it has on the back of it a wee template on the back, a wee table, and it says, if you change this to solar panels, you'll save this amount a year. If you change it to ground for heat pump, save this amount a year. If you change the boiler to condenser combi boiler, you'll save this amount. If you change LED lights, this. If you put insulation in up to 260 millimeters in the loft and that, and then you'll get this amount. And then you've got to work out what the cost of that is. I think it says on it a rough idea about what that cost will be, and then what you'll save. Yeah, and then you could work it yourself. What is the most efficient improvements for the return that you would get? In other words, if it's going to cost you $1,000 to do your insulation, and you're going to get an improvement in the energy cost of 300 quid a year, then that's a 30% return. It also is an improvement to your property, therefore makes it a bit more desirable. So the grand will go on to the value of the property, really, because the energy efficiency is a higher banding now. That's key. So think it like that. I mean, you're not saving the 300 quid a year. The tenant's going to be saving it. But the tenant might pay a higher rent, just a slightly higher rent. You also might attract a better quality tenant as well, which will stay longer and look after the property longer. So you'll have to do less repairs and improvements over time. That's what you've got to think about, definitely, when it comes to that. You've also got things like the older stock versus modern. I mean, I've covered that already. Insulation, heat retention, renewables technology, I'm still not convinced. Still not convinced. Heat pumps, alternative heating, still not convinced. Upgrade cost versus long-term benefits, well, we just discussed that. Tenant energy costs, kind of just discussed that. And factor in future improvements into purchase decisions. You've got to think when you purchase a property, it's like, what am I going to have to do to future-proof that later on?
If you're buying a buy-to-let investment just now, I advise, if you could find something that's C or as close to a C, that would probably be a good choice, because then you're not going to have a lot of improvements.
Yeah, the likelihood is you're going to get close to it. And
and
I'll be honest, I think the government's going to kick it into touch again.
Yeah, they probably
when it gets to the EPC legislation again, they'll kick it into touch. They'll realise that people can't afford it. Landlords really can't get to that level of rating because of the type of property they've got. I mean, if you've got a stone-built cottage out in the middle of nowhere, it's got no access, it's got its own septic tank, and it's got its own LPG, how on earth are you going to get that to a
rating G or something?
Yeah, that's going to be impossible, isn't it? There's no way. So there's going to be what I call a get out of jail card in the EPC legislation, to say that if it is prohibitive to be able to do that for the return that the tenant would get, then the answer to that is we'll exempt you from the EPC legislation. And that's what was in it before, hence the reason why I just went, well, I'm not going to do anything until it's set in stone.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I never did anything until it's set in stone, and therefore Hallelujah. Because the last time I did something before it was set in stone, I changed every single electricity box to a composite, RCD protected box. And then they decided after that was put in place, no, we've actually changed our mind. We're going to make it metal. What?
We also done all the hardwired smoke alarms, and that's changed as well.
Hardwired smoke alarms were trunking all the way through the property and everything like that. And they went, no, we can have it interlinked to wireless now. What? And I've just gone to all that expense of spending the best part of £30,000 to do all this. And you've now said that you didn't really need to spend that. So I'm a big fan of obviously waiting to see what happens first before we actually do anything at all. And it has paid off now. So I would advise that's what everybody should do. But just to finish that one off and come on to the seventh myth, which is property always makes money. Tomorrow's successful property may need to provide more than somewhere to live. It may need to provide somewhere affordable to run. So that's the one you've got to remember about that. Let's go on to this one, though. This is a classic. Property always makes money. It doesn't. It doesn't. I could show you. History is a great revealer, and I could show you and tell you about loads of people that had their properties repossessed because it never made enough money during the time that they had it. We have accidental landlords that come to us and say, look, I'm just going to rent my house because I'm going to move to another house. I'm going to release the capital. And lo and behold, eventually they've had to sell it for a fire sale, really, because, a fire sale is basically rock bottom because they just need rid of it quick because it's bleeding their cash. Because it's the classic example, the one in question I remember, they never factored in for the boiler breaking down. They never factored in for the electrics having to be upgraded because of the new ICR legislation. They never factored in any of that at all, and they didn't have any money coming out of their own pocket or their savings to be able to do that. So they just had to let it go for literally next to nothing, about 10 or 15,000 less than what it should be.
Because they didn't have that knowledge in the first place. That's the thing they should be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, property historically, let's say this, has created considerable wealth.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean to say every property is a good investment.
No. Why is that then?
By the wrong location.
Yeah.
I still think in a market where it's booming, you could make the wrong location the right location eventually. And London's a classic example of that, about all the areas like Battersea and everything. It's all changed over time.
So got there 20 years ago to now.
Well, look at Aberhill now, right next to the train station, leading to Edinburgh. I mean, that's a very attractive proposition now for anybody there and buying at a low cost to get entry level to a first time buy or an investor property. You could overpay for the property in the beginning. That could be a one that somebody gets caught out in. You don't understand your numbers. You don't understand where your return is. You've not worked out your risk analysis where your break-even point comes along. Is it 8 months? Is it 4 months unoccupied and then you break even, or is it 1 month unoccupied and then you're breaking even? Because then you're really on the margin. You're really at marginal costing at that point in time.
Yeah,
you can overborrow.
Yeah, we spoke about that. Yeah,
yeah, we've had this discussion off camera recently about the investment I was wanting to make, and that still might happen, but I'm nervous. I am nervous. I don't know why. It's like my wee spidey sense. It's tingling.
Underlying feeling.
There's something. Just be careful, Jim. Be careful. I don't know what it is, but I do have that sixth sense, and I've learnt to listen to it and just see what happens and hold off.
Let it play out, yeah, because there's something maybe not quite adding up a bit, but we'll see. But yeah, the overborrowing, you're right, and you could underestimate your refurbishment costs and things. I see that happen so many times. This is my budget, and it's like, right, okay, but you've not got any contingency on that. You've no scope on that. So
right. We've found dry rot.
Yeah.
Your wiring is your permission for that extension wasn't really any permission for it at all. What?
Yeah, so it's gone down.
And it's like I've had somebody contact me recently, and it's like they bought a house and they just went, oh, it doesn't matter about the permission. Now they're trying to sell the house, they can't sell it. because they don't have permission
for the changes. Yeah,
it's come back to haunt them. They thought it was their dream house, and now it's become their nightmare, I suppose.
Misunderstanding rental demands one as well. People buy in areas just because of the price and don't have the research as their actual demand for this type of property here, as the tenants there, and it could change quite.
I think it's so bizarre. I think it's so bizarre, Richard, when you said that. Misunderstanding rental demand. I think it's so bizarre that you get so many would-be investors or sourcers coming on and saying, "Oh, I bought this one for 39,999," in order, obviously, to get away with the ADS. And I'm going to refurbish it, and it's going to be 55,000, and I'm going to spend 10 grand refurbishing it, and then I'm going to buy to let it, and I'm going to rent it. And I'm like, God, buying a property for 40 grand implies to be straight away, it might not be in the most attractive area for anyone to stay. So did you ever consider that?
You're going to do all this and then it'll be sitting empty.
Yeah.
Or you have the wrong tenant.
Because you don't know who's at either side of you. You've maybe not even taken that into account at all, because you've maybe bought it off auction and you're not allowed to see it.
Yeah, and that's like you say, you could buy an apparently, profitable property, and then costs or obviously they not find the right tenant or a tenant at all. Eventually, then completely consumes your returns, and it's been a bit of a
here's a good one. Oh damn! I never knew there was a property factor.
Yeah, I've had that.
Then they cost £100 a month. There's £100 of your rent going every single month, and if your rent's sitting at what? I don't know, 500. You've instantly wiped out 20% of your margin just because the property factor's there, and you never thought about checking what the cost was to run that. That's a really good one to remember.
Yeah, property just doesn't automatically simply because you own it. You really need to remember all the fundamental things, and they are
purchase price. Finance, demand, the rent you would achieve for it, the running costs, in other words, the finance costs and the fixed or the variable, can they go up or down? The condition, you have to refurb it. The location is probably key. The management it has to take. I mean, this is the other one that I don't get it. It's like the amount of people that actually buy a property outside of their traveling distance,
and then try to
and then try to get, and they're not even really sure if anybody else can manage it properly, and they just appoint anybody that's in the area as an agent that's got a pulse, and then they wonder why it maybe goes pear-shaped for them, and they have to get rid of it because they can't manage it because they're not close enough to it. I'll always buy property it's within the area, except for that one in Spain.
But that's
Well, it did become and I did buy it for a rental, believe it or not. I was going to use it as serviced accommodation. 20 years ago, I was going to do serviced accommodation in Spain, and then I looked at it and thought, nobody else is getting to stay here. They'll just ruin it. I'm keeping it because it's a brand new property, and I'm keeping it. So I've kept it ever since. I've still got it. So literally I've had 20 years of a property, but we've only used it less than a year overall. So really it's still a brand new property in essence. So successful investors don't simply ask, will property prices rise? They ask, does the investment still make sense if they don't? That's exactly what I do.
Yep.
Does this investment still make money? And does it make sense if property prices never go up? Because I never bank on the property appreciation. Ever.
Yeah.
The only thing I ever do is bank on the amount of cash flow it's going to come in every single month once everything's covered for that property, in order to store that away for a rainy day to use on other properties potentially, because having a multiple portfolio and quite a big large portfolio gives you some sort of insurance. In other words, some will pay for others at different times of the year or different times of the cycle, because some will make a lot more money because they're not needing anything done to it, and that will pay for the ones that you didn't think would need more money and does need more money. So it offsets each other. That's really what you're doing. That's the same principle when you use a letting agent. When you use a letting agent, what you're banking on here is the letting agent is going to manage it more effectively than you and get a higher return on you, and they're going to take a lot of that burden off of you and make it more efficient. That's what you're banking on, because that allows you to go and do other things which are more important to you, whether it's a lifestyle choice or whether it's I can make more money doing this rather than actually managing more.
Use your time a lot more efficiently.
That's what you're doing. Or I could make more money buying another property and banking, some sort of initial money value in it. For example, it's maybe when it's 60, you offer 45, which I did actually, and I got it at 45. Yeah. Well, I got it at 45,500. They insisted they want a £500 more, and I went, "Oh, that's going to be a tough one." Yeah, okay then.
I could stretch to that.
I hope they're not watching this now. But it was a number.
Do you know? I think it's
a shame. They had an estate agent too, and the estate agent let that go. Well, the estate agent didn't get a choice because they went to someone else to actually speak to them privately, and that then got to me, and then I went to them privately out with the estate agent and says, 45 is where my numbers work, and she said 45 and a half, and I went, yeah, deal done. Hey, and then they went back to the estate agent and went, I've sold it for 45 and a half, and it's like that estate agent should hang their head in shame.
Done your job for you, basically.
Yeah, 14,500 pound I got off of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy, yeah. But that was just a 60 grand flat. So when you think about that, it's 14 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got 24% off of that on a conversation.
Now, people, and you'll have been asked this quite a lot, Jim, and I know you have, but people obviously look at how have you got to where you are and how you're successful in what you do. But it's because you do have such a very different approach to investing than not everybody, but I think most people. I mean, I don't know any other investor that does things entirely.
I have an entirely different approach to property investing.
Oh, I know, but
as any other person does. Mm-hmm. But I've now noticed that there's a lot of people actually understanding what I do, and some of the things that I do are actually creeping into what they're doing. I was seeing it. I saw it this morning on social media, and this guy said word for word basically what I've said, and I'm thinking, you've obviously been secretly listening to my podcast. This guy actually runs another property podcast, by the way, and I was like, you've obviously been tuning into what I'm saying. Because you don't just, I mean, you've got to get that idea from somewhere. You don't just magically think that same thing up, do you? I mean, everything the knowledge and expertise that I've brought to the table has all been acquired from everyone else.
And you've put it all together to make.
Yeah, and I've put it all together, and it's coming out in my words. And it's just so happens that person's almost word for word verbatim and sounds exactly like me. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe just coincidence.
Yeah, possibly. Or take it as a compliment.
Let's talk about the most expensive myth.
Yeah, let's round up with this. And yeah, money myths are powerful because they often contain just that little bit enough truth to sound convincing. And like we've said, these myths, you need money to invest, but money without that knowledge isn't enough. Definitely. And we've demonstrated that. We spoke about debt. Debt can be dangerous, but intelligently managed, it could really leverage your ability to build wealth.
Yep.
And we've clearly demonstrated that through our discussion today, hopefully, and throughout the shows that if you tune into. Property can produce income, but it isn't automatically passive. Please do not fall into that.
Passive. Yeah. It's never passive, Richard. Even I'm literally almost passive. But that's because you guys I've got my own agency and they run on what you run on my portfolio for me. But I'm still actively involved in looking at new units to buy and new investment strategies, and actually, things that I think it might be an additional value add to the portfolio we've got already. So I'm still actively involved to a degree, but I think that's more through choice. So I think, yes, it isn't automatically passive, but you maybe have a choice whether you want to be as passive as little or as more as you want, really.
Yeah. And then we spoke about housing demand. Housing demand can sometimes and at present be enormous, but supply doesn't necessarily respond quickly. We talk
Never
about
does. Never does. Never does. Government policy creates uncertainty, but uncertainty doesn't mean opportunity disappears. Uncertainty, I would say, creates more opportunities.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and then the net zero creates costs, but ignoring the changing housing market can ultimately cost you quite considerably. I would stay with the net zero, and I was going to add that then when we spoke about it. Don't let it completely consume your thought process about EPC ratings and things. It will come, but like you said, Jim, wait until it happens and then act upon it.
I would. My advice to someone with that is build cash reserves on the premise that net zero might end up happening for EPCs. No, I'm not saying net zero will happen, not net zero, but EPCs might have to get upgraded on properties
it will come eventually.
That mark. So store cash away on the principle that might actually happen by a certain date, which was muted the date they would do.
Yeah.
Whether, I don't know when you're watching this, so it could be, look it up. You'll find the date they've decided they're going to put in place legislation to do that for the private rental sector, especially. So store cash away, and if it doesn't happen, happy days. You can go and invest in more property potentially. Yeah.
And property, of course, does create wealth, but just because you own the property, it doesn't always guarantee that.
Yeah, you've got to
have the right strategy. Yeah, have the right strategy.
Like the whole thing. You've got to do something. You can't actually just, I've got a property. Okay, so who's refurbishing it? Who's actually making sure it's compliant? Who's finding the tenant? Who's moving somebody in? Who's drawing up lease? Who's actually telling everybody and taking them around and showing all the stopcock and how everything works? Who's doing all that? Who's notifying the utilities? Who's notifying the council tax? Somebody. So it's not. Just having it, the ownership doesn't guarantee your wealth.
No, and when you think of that whole process, the whole buying and investment property and all that, and the letting and management, there's a lot involved. So have the right team around you. Final thoughts for today. I think the biggest financial risk isn't always making the wrong investments, especially with property. Sometimes it's building an entire financial future around something you assumed was true, but never actually questioning it. Yeah. Always ask questions. I think that's always ask questions. There is no silly questions. People fear asking questions in case they sound silly. Well, you'd rather sound silly than be wrong and have a costly mistake.
I tell you what, if you don't ask the questions and you go in blind to what you're doing and it ends up going pear-shaped, you're in real trouble. That could sink your ship, basically. That's why really successful wealth creation isn't about believing everything you're told about money. Even though you think somebody's extremely successful, even listen to this. If you think, they're extremely successful, they know what they're talking about, I'll always go and fact check everything.
Yeah.
If I don't know the real answer to that myself, because I'm not in that space, then I'll go and fact check it and make sure there's other external sources which actually verify this claim that's been made about property or about a market or about a certain investment. That's what I would do. The key here is, though, this is about understanding the numbers.
Yeah.
And then challenging the myths and making decisions that can survive reality.
Yeah, and not just scenarios that are in headlines that aren't actually the reality.
Yeah, we're going to be rich beyond the wildest dreams. What are we doing? Property. Oh, well, that's not as easy as you think. But you can get there. It's a better vehicle than most things.
If done, and I think that today's topic of money myths is really about knowing where you're getting your information and sourcing the right assistance and having the right team around you, and not believing everything you're told, because it can really have a detrimental effect on your investment. So, yeah, that would be my best advice from today's show. Is look at where your sources are, and like you said, Jim, validate who you're listening to. Look at the individuals or their companies and see if that information is right, and don't always listen to headlines.
Yep.
Good. Right, let's round that up today. That was a really good show. Hopefully there's a lot of information in there for everyone. Jim and I will be back next time as usual. Until then, jump in the comments box. You can reach out to me direct in the post attached. And until then, we will see you next time.
Bye for now.
Thanks, Jim.